All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bassam Haddad. I am hosting this third part of Questioning the State Briefings on Palestine. We are very fortunate to have with us two of the um, traditional fixtures at these briefings that we have all been watching with interest, not least given the sort of um, bizarre nature of some of the responses, which can only be heard or mainly be heard in the State Department as opposed to the rest of the world and maybe a couple of countries like Israel and Micronesia. And I'm not being facetious, I'm not being too sarcastic. This is precisely what we do now. We watch these briefings, or many of us watch these briefings with a sense of disbelief as to what we are hearing in terms of responses. And we will share with you some of these in just a few minutes. But first, let me say that this is a part of the Gaza Collaborative Project, which includes more than 24 universities and research centers worldwide, and it is also co-sponsored by many other institutions, but we kind of capped it at 24 because of the need to make sure that we have a critical mass, producing this material, and others can join. Until today, people are emailing us sharing that they would like to sponsor these sets of events. You can find all of the events so far, more than 60 events, at palestineincontext.org. I will share the website in just a moment on the screen. And this is our third installment of Questioning the State. We have with us Saeed Arikat and Sam Husseini. I will introduce them. Let me just say that at this point, the definite collapse of Israel's narrative regarding its war or genocide campaign in Gaza has begun to lightly strain relations, even with its near unconditional ally, the United States. Yet, in foreign policy briefings, as we will address today at the US State Department, we continue to witness obfuscation, duplicity, and double standards, and at times brazen abrogation of several fundamental values professed by the United States when it comes to Israel and Palestine. Our guests are some of the most recurring and critical fixtures of these briefings, as I shared, and they will share some of their recent experiences as well as experiences that they have had prior, including Sam Husseini's experience in November of 2023 when he floated the question of genocide and the International Court of Justice. We will get to all of that in just a minute. Before I introduce Saeed, let me ask both of you, how are you doing? كيفكن?
Doing okay under the circumstances.
Yes, as well as can be expected.
Thank you for joining, Saeed and
Thank
Sam. We three of us go back a long way. I remember, actually, I know Sam before I met Saeed from the
Long time.
1990s. I've seen you around everywhere, and you were really busy doing the same busy work here in Washington. And Saeed, of course, of late in the past many years, maybe 20 years, we've been connecting. So I'm appreciative that you all joined us on relative short notice. We will start with Saeed, and then we will move on to Sam. We will then show some videos of the exchanges at the State Department, and after that, we will have a conversation that addresses the gamut, including what's happening in Rafah, the U.S. positions, to what extent can we take seriously the cautionary approach of the United States and President Biden, and perhaps a little about what to be expected next. Let me start by introducing Saeed. Saeed Arikat has been the Washington bureau chief of the prominent Al-Quds daily newspaper and an adjunct professor at American University. Currently, his reporting centers around the U.S. Department of State. He is a frequent guest on Arab Satellite TV as commentator on U.S. politics and its foreign and security policies. I have to say that this is a very short bio, but I will keep it at that, and I will give the floor to Saeed to share his initial comments.
Thank you, Bassam. It is really wonderful to be with you again, and with this time around with Sam Husseini, a friend, and someone whom I have known really for a very long time as well. I can't even remember how far back we go. But for sure, I mean, Sam and I and you, Bassam, have been around this town for a very long time. I go to this. I have been going to the State Department Jesus, since definitely since the late '90s. I mean, I think I remember Rubin. Probably Jamie Rubin. I think the last. I mean, I attended some of his briefing, and definitely Boucher and all the others that followed thereafter. Uh, PJ Crowley, Victoria Newland for sure. Victoria Newland, and others, and so on. And it's always been my motivation really to go to these uh, you know press conferences, the briefing, is basically to ask about the issues that I would be writing about. When in 2001 and 2002 and 2003, I mean, we're all focused on, let's say, the upcoming war, or the ongoing war that was happening in Afghanistan, and the upcoming war that was to happen in Iraq, for sure. And of course, the reoccupation of the West Bank. I mean, people tend to forget that, but that's when they put Yasser Arafat, the head of the Palestinian Authority, under siege. Basically, they imprisoned him, and they erected the wall, and they killed a lot of people during the second Intifada. Now, I did have a hiatus. I was the spokesman for the UN in Iraq for a 5 year period, but then I picked up where I was. And let me say this, I mean, before we delve into the issues, the truth is that there aren't very many places around the world, at least to the best of my knowledge, where you have a similar setup, where you can go and basically question the government on what they do, on their policy, and so on. I know that, let's say, the French foreign ministry probably holds few and far in between. They are not on regular basis. I don't see people questioning the French government on the issue of Palestine. Russia, Moscow is the same thing. That's a bit of my knowledge. So we go there because we feel, for two reasons. In my case, for sure, my top priority issue is Palestine, and basically because of the injustice inflicted on the Palestinians, and because I write for a newspaper that publishes in East Jerusalem. So I go there to ask about these issues, and the second reason, of course, is because the United States of America, more than any other country in the world, really impacts and affects the policies of Israel. It sustains Israel. It keeps it on an umbilical cord. It gives it money and arms, and above all, it gives it a political green light to do what it does day in and day out.
I'm not sure if we lost Saeed. We'll give him just a moment. Yep, I think we have may have lost him. All right, I think it's official that we have lost him. Let me ask him to call back. I know he probably is gonna call back anyway.
Of course.
Sam, are you ready to go if he is not able to call back right away?
Sure. I mean, I can.
Yeah,
Yeah.
1 second. Let's give him.
Yeah. I think we can hopefully get him back.
Yeah, and he was on a roll. That's unfortunate.
Hmm.
You've been to the State Department recently, right, Hussein? I mean, Hussein? Sam?
Yeah, I was there last week.
Awesome.
They don't call on me though. Minor technicality.
Yeah, it looks like we have lost him. All right. So how about if you can go ahead and share your views, and then we will get back to
Sure.
Saeed. If for any reason he's not able to call back or something's up with his connection, I can bring him in by phone. So that shouldn't be a problem.
Okay.
Is that okay? Let me
That's totally fine.
1 second. Let me just he's gonna try to reconnect right now. Well, as we wait for Saeed, Sam, can you tell us what the vibe is when you have been visiting recently compared to the earlier parts? Basically, in the first 2 or 3 months, is there a different sort of
Yeah, there
atmosphere?
there is. I mean, when I went there, I remember vividly the first news conference after October 7th, um, and there virtually no one other than Saeed and myself and Max Blumenthal came to that one was asking tough questions. Now you're seeing a lot more tough questions. I wish they were more rigorous, but there is certainly a different tenor than there was early on. That there is at least, partially in response to the whistleblowers that have come out of the State Department.
I suspected that. So we'll talk about this a bit more. Saeed, welcome back. It seems like
Thank
you're
you. I'm
connecting by
really
phone.
awfully sorry about this. I don't know. I guess somebody is just maybe hitting on my my.
The phone is good. The phone is good.
Okay, good. Can you?
Okay, so please feel free to continue. I just asked a quick question
Okay,
to Sam. Why do
sure.
I want to call you Hussein? I just asked a quick question to again Sam before you joined back about if the atmosphere had changed between the first 3.5 months and the second 3.5 months. But I'll let you continue. Thanks for coming back.
Yeah, you want me to continue? Yes. Okay. All right. Again, apologies. So, I go there because the United States of America gives Israel billions of dollars every year so it can maintain its occupation. So they are subcontracting the occupation. And that is really basically the motive. It's not, I mean, I don't go there because it's a fun place. I don't go there. I mean, the issues, of course, concern me. I mean, I like to ask about other issues, but the Palestinian issue seems to dominate, especially since October 7, because the U.S. government thinks that history began on that day. They don't look at what has happened before that. They don't look at the fact that we have been going there day after day, asking about U.S. policy about these issues way before. I mean, like Sam said, we there were times when I would go and I would be the only one asking about the Palestinian issues, whether it's settler violence, Israeli violence, whether it's administrative detention, which is illegal, whether it's in a way breaks it's a violation of international law, international humanitarian law, and so on. But these issues would not
Let me ask you
echo,
about
would
something
not
because
resonate, and so on. So that's where when after October 7, Bassam, very quickly after October 7, we have seen a great deal of interest with this issue with Gaza, and then we have seen the questions sort of move very quickly to become more substantive. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Saeed. Would you maybe we should go to Sam before
Sure.
we actually and ask other questions. So let's go to Sam. Saeed, I'm sorry for this interruption. It
That's
probably
okay, no problem.
threw you
I
off,
got you.
but I'll give you
I think
I'll give you a chance before After we
No
finish,
problem.
I have a couple
No
questions
problem.
before we get to the videos,
Please.
actually. So we'll go to Sam and then come back to you. Sam, the floor is yours for your initial comments.
Thanks. I mean, I come at this from our work overlaps, but I come at this from a somewhat different, lineage. My day job is with a nonprofit that I put out almost daily news releases. And that's sort of my primary responsibility. So I can't get in there every day like Saeed can. And also he's like in the bullpen, so he gets a question in every day, which makes it very timely and incredibly important. um, when I do get a question in and they, I think, go to pains to not ask me a question, and I think they've been trying to undermine Saeed lately as well, frankly. um, uh, I try to ask a very substantial question to really pin them down in a way that other reporters typically don't. I kind of view my role as almost like an initial prosecutor for a deposition of a case, rather than simply asking for the news of the day. And I think that the tougher the questioning is, and I've long held this belief. I would get questions in. I used to have an office at the press club, and I would go to the news conferences there and ask tough questions there, and in other venues before I started semi regularly going to the State Department. The tougher the questions, the more peaceful the outside world. If you're having a news conference and everybody's schmoozing and glad handing, and the journalists are asking cushy questions, that's a recipe for increased violence, oppression, and mayhem. So, in my questions that I've been able to get in since October 7th, and I did some, on Palestine, of course, like Saeed did before October 7th. I remember asking when they demonized Roger Waters. I asked about that and how they were smearing him as an anti-Semite because of his criticism of Israel, for example. A whole litany of things and big lies that were promulgated on behalf of Israel that I think helped set the stage for this genocide that we see before us. But since then, I did a ton of work for my job at the Institute for Public Accuracy in getting the legal framework out for a country to invoke the Genocide Convention. And I also asked that at the State Department briefings to try to promulgate that idea out there. And of course, South Africa eventually did that at the very end of 2003.
Do you recognize the Geneva?
Sorry. And I also asked about the Geneva Convention. There you go. And, trying to crystallize the insidious nature. I mean, the formative event for me was, Iraq and the lies around the Iraq invasion. And I see a lot of similarities here where the entire structure of destruction is built on tons of lies and deceits. And I did a lot of work in terms of writing a news release to debunk the claims that were made during the buildup of the Iraq War. But I feel a need to highlight that critique as much as possible in a venue like the State Department briefings. And it's a very unfair framework, right? They get to call on you and they get to cut off questions. And they get to decide that they can duck you a bunch. And then, if they keep doing it too much, then you got to call out. And I've had journalists who are not, sympathetic to my point of view, noting that, they obviously don't want to call on you. So I've tried to put out a rigorous critique in as timely way as possible. And part of my focus has been on how the United States has set up a legal framework to say that the Geneva Conventions effectively don't apply, effectively making it into a free fire zone. A bunch of journalists, maybe 2 weeks ago, asked about the Leahy laws. And and
I
the
do.
spokesperson was ducking and weaving as to whether or not they applied and what the threshold was. And I brought in, just you guys. There's also the Glenn Symington amendments and the Arms Export Act, which say that you should cut off aid to a nuclear proliferator. Will you acknowledge that Israel has a nuclear weapons arsenal? And they won't even acknowledge that. Of course, that's long-standing U.S. policy. So, U.S. policy for a very long time has been openly capable of denying the most obvious empirical realities. So I'm honest. I mean, the events in Gaza are horrific, but I'm not surprised by the brazenness that we see by the State Department and the Biden administration in general. I think that their current statements are largely posturing as a response to the outcry among young people and other people as to how horrific what's happening is. If the U.S. wanted to stop Israel from doing what it's doing, it could stop it in a heartbeat, either by real cutoff of weapons, or they could just simply let a Chapter 7 resolution go through the United Nations Security Council calling for a ceasefire. Virtually everybody else would probably be on board for that. Maybe France or England would cause a ruckus. But if the Biden administration actually wanted to stop, they could put a stop to it immediately.
As we go forward, can you just very briefly comment on the current moment on the question of U.S. support for calling for caution in terms of what it is willing and not willing to do in terms of arming Israel at this moment, and the extent to which you take it seriously based on your exchanges with people in that arena? Start with
That to
Saeed.
me or to Sam?
We'll
Huh?
start with you, Saeed.
Okay. Well, that's a very good question. First of all, in terms of giving questions and so on, they always tell you, and I think I've heard this from every spokesperson for the better part of 25 years and so on, that the question is really a discretion. You don't have the right to ask a question. One good thing in the State Department is that the people in the State Department, Bassam, are more serious than, let's say, people in the White House. In the White House, they really peddle, softball questions and so on about domestic policy and so on. But because of the intensity of foreign policy, from time to time you get a lot of good questions, and people ask whether it's about Russia or Syria and so on. I mean, I was a lonely voice during the Arab Spring because everybody was rooting the Arab Spring. I was not. I mean, for full disclosure, I'm not. And so I was always asking not the kind of questions that were expected. On Palestine, it's ironically enough, it's somewhat easier because U.S. policy towards the Palestinian issue has always been hostile. It has been the subcontractor for the occupation. It has been the supplier of U.S. Of arms to Israel. It has always find a reason as to why Israel has a right to bomb and kill people in the hundreds and the thousands. I mean, today Monday, we saw the deputy spokesperson and talks about repeatedly how Israel Hamas embed itself in populated area, and he talks about human shields and so on. I don't think they understand what the human shields are. I mean, I asked the question way back: do you understand what the human shields are and where the term came from? Obviously they don't. They repeat something that Israel tells them. It's the talking point by Israel. I mean, it's if anyone uses people for a human shield, it's the Israelis. I mean, we remember very well that during the first Intifada, they would strap the kids around the jeeps and they would go into these demonstrations, because if they put the kids, then the other kids will not throw stones at them. So they're the ones that really invented the human shield kind of a thing and do it today. Now, it is silly and ludicrous to say, Hamas is in a populated area. Of course, Hamas is in a populated area. Hamas is a national liberation movement. It's not some army that has funds and air bases and airplane and navy and all that stuff so you can buy them. So this is something that they can use and peddle, and people find, oh yeah, well, maybe that's why they deserve it. So it, in a way, when you say human shield, it's basically saying they deserve it. They deserve to die because they allow Hamas. I'm not saying they would say this outwardly, but that's exactly the message. I mean, I asked today, uh, you know, uh, how is it not a violation of the laws of war when we know that Herzog, the president of Israel, came out and said there are no civilians in Gaza? He actually said that. When Gallant said there are human animals and we are going to wipe it out, he actually said that. That's the Minister of Defense. When the Prime Minister of Israel and I raised this, I raised this today in the briefing. That's why I'm talking about it. When Netanyahu himself, he said, go after the Amalek, and kill them all, kill the baby and so on, steal their crops, destroy, burn, and do all that stuff. So it's his intent is there. I mean, this is the thing. The United States government is constantly saying that Israel does not have the intent. I mean, today we went through this whole thing about Russia and Israel and whether Israel is guilty or no. Israel has an accountability system, which is just garbage. It's malarkey. It's not. It doesn't. I mean, look what happened with Shireen Abu Akleh. I asked a question on last Thursday because Shireen's second assassination second anniversary was on the 11th. So I asked the question on the 9th, and I said, do you have anything to say after 2 years? And he basically says, case is closed. Case is closed. So what we saw is that the security coordinator, the American security coordinator, came out on the 4th of July, 2022, when everybody was taking a holiday, and issued a statement saying, well, more than likely she was killed by an Israeli bullet, but the intent was there. So that's the kind of BS that you deal with. I mean, day in and day out when it comes to Israel. So I mean, to their credit, I mean, so there are people that in the State Department raise these issues. I mean, they don't shy away from it. Sometimes they probably project a little bit more intense scrutiny of my question, as opposed to others or versus others. But I mean, what we have seen in the past few months, that these issues, whether it's on the national security memo that was released on Friday, it says, maybe Israel violated, but it ends right there. There is nothing else to do it. So, I mean, so that's the kind of thing that we deal with daily. I think, if I understood your question right, that's Sam.
Yeah. 1 second. Absolutely. Let's go to a one of the videos that I have for you, Saeed, and then we'll do the others for Sam. Let me bring it up here. 1 second. I don't know why for some reason. It doesn't like your videos, yeah, Saeed.
I don't know.
The system, even
it's a conspiracy.
Even the broadcast
Yeah?
system has an issue with your videos. 1
So
second.
there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Hmm. طيب. This is a video from Saeed's archives, recent archive. Let's see if we can pull it off here. All right.
something the president said yesterday. He said that Hamas is motivated by the ancient desire to eliminate the Jews. Is that the thinking in this building, that Hamas is only motivated by ancient desire to eliminate the Jews?
Is that the thinking in this building? That is what Hamas has said. Hamas has come out and publicly said that they want to eliminate. Hold on,
contextually, that is wrong, Matt, because Hamas came into being in 1987 in the midst of an intifada against the occupation, responding to a brutal Israeli attack on Gaza. So when we say ancient desires, I mean that's
I think you are ignoring the repeated. Right. Over years and years of anti-Semitic statements by Hamas saying that they are committed to the destruction of the state of Israel and committed to the death of the Israeli people. Right. I don't think that's a very controversial statement. That is well documented. Hold on. Let me finish. Hamas has been quite clear what their goals are when it comes to the Israeli people, and that is the total elimination of the Israeli people. We have seen them say they wanted to repeat the attacks of October 7th again and again and again. Right. So yes, the president was absolutely right in his comments.
He was absolutely right that they are motivated by ancient desires.
That is what they have made that clear a number of times.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. There is reports that Israel. Thank you, Matt. There is reports that Israel.
So, Saeed, can you give us some background and context here?
Yes, I mean, the context is that the president makes such a statement and he feels that he can throw it out there with no accountability, with no one ever questioning this. We saw him do this with the decapitation of babies. We saw him do this with the mass rape issue. All stories that have been debunked. And when you come out and for the president of the United States to go, he was speaking at the Holocaust Memorial and so on. And then, it may be a catchy phrase. Maybe he's trying to buddy up to certain certain parts of the electorate, whatever it is, whatever the motive. But you cannot say that Hamas is motivated by ancient desire to eliminate the Jews. That is not the case. I mean, Hamas is the enemy of Israel. Yes, of course. But Hamas, first of all, is a new organization. Relatively, it came out in the Intifada. I am talking about factual things. I'm not arguing whether and all that at length, and whether Hamas actually indulges in anti-Semitic rhetoric or something. But that was not my question. My question was that they failed to ignore the fact that Hamas basically came into being to fight the occupation, because there was a brutal occupation that was killing people, imprisoning people, and doing all these things, exactly as other Palestinian movements. I mean, we've had a Palestinian National Liberation Movement that go all the way back to the 30s. It's not something new, and that is really my point. My point was by the ancient. Yeah, my point is that look at the facts. I mean, don't just throw terms that by the most powerful man in the world, in this case, the President of the United States, who can say they are motivated by ancient desire to eliminate Jews. It's just not true.
Thank you. Sam, do you want to comment on this before we move on? 1 second. You seem to be muted. I don't know why. Okay, try now.
Sure. Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I don't have it in front of me, but I think Biden in those remarks and went on to claim that Hamas was out to kill all Jews or something like that, totally ignoring the charter from 1997. So that's like one of these elephants in the room, things that do get totally ignored. So there's a whole litany of them, and to try to highlight critical facts like that to undermine their narrative, which has.
Just let me finish.
Their narrative, which has such little basis in reality.
Can you say a little bit about the second or the amendment to the charter? It's something that I'm not even sure how important it is, in the sense that those who have made up their minds, will not consider anything else as consequential. But can you tell us a little bit about the amendment to the charter?
Sure. Well, I believe it was 2017. I'm trying to get my. I think I had this as one of my questions, so I'm trying to get that file up if I can. But at that point, Hamas revised their charter and made clear that they do not fight Jews. They do not fight Israelis because they're Jews. They fight Israelis because they are occupying Palestinian land. And it's quite clear in their revised charter, and they go on to make the point that it's actually Israel that continues to conflate Zionism with Judaism, something which has been highlighted more and more in recent months.
Do you think, Sam, if Australians came and occupied Palestine, resistance groups in Palestine would fight them, or they wouldn't because they're Australian? I'm just like trying to.
Well, I mean, I view Israel as the latest pretext for the settler colonial project. That is, in the mid 40s, the settler colonial project, which had white man's burden and Christianity and so on as its pretext, which was the main global feature over the last half millennia, collapsed with World War II. Decolonization was supposed to happen, and then Israel afforded the West this new pretext to continue the settler colonial project. Suffering of the Jewish people, Jews themselves being a victim of European oppression. So I think I think, of course, to your question regarding Australians, I assume you mean Christian Australians.
Or anybody.
Yeah. I think the answer to that is yes, but I think that the unique feature of Israel is that it is the last continuation of European settler colonialism.
All right, Sam, can you set up? Did you want to say something, Saeed?
No, I mean, I agree 100%. The Palestinians are motivated to free themselves from the shackles. One of the things that the president said that was so wrong, a couple of weeks ago, he said that the word intifada is hurtful. Mm-hmm. The word intifada is hurtful. They try to say that the word intifada, they have not called it an anti-Semitic phrase, but close to it. And intifada means exactly the shaking off. And in this case, the Palestinians, when basically they wanted to shake off the occupation. There was no other way. But if you notice that the Palestinians are not allowed to fight by word, they're not allowed to fight peacefully, they're not allowed to fight to resist, with armed resistance and so on. Almost, on college campuses, on U.S. college campuses, no less, you're not allowed to fight with BDS, for instance. They call the Students for Justice in Palestine as anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic and all that stuff, all that garbage. So basically, if they have done everything possible, and they do everything possible to basically deny the Palestinians any ability, any right to resist the Israeli occupation, they don't know what to do with the Palestinians. They want to wake up one day and find them all gone. They're not going to be all gone. See, this is the thing. It's the dilemma that they will continue to fight. I mean, they knew the Zionist project was achievable simply because of the conditions of the time, the geopolitical conditions of the time, So it could materialize. It did materialize, but they did not know what are they going to do with the Palestinians. They thought maybe the Palestinians, all of them would leave Palestine, that all Palestine would become, Jewish if as they wanted to, and maybe ethnically cleanse of all Palestinians. Well, that did not happen. They will continue to be there. So they do have a dilemma. They don't know how to handle it. They don't know how to handle kids that are demonstrating on college campuses in the United States of America. And what do they ask for? I mean, Bassam, I went there the other day to the encampment at GW. And I can tell you, I went around. I mean, they said that the encampment had signs. They had some students claiming the encampment had signs, go back to Poland, things like this. I mean, some nonsense, okay? So I went around and I looked at all the signs. I found signs that says Free Palestine. I found signs that said Free Palestine. I found signs that says ceasefire now. I found a couple of signs under the food table. They had a long food table that basically said from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free or shall be free, whatever. So these are the kind of signs that are there. None I have not seen, and I really follow this very closely. I have not seen any words that are hurtful, that are threatening. But basically, when you say these things threaten Jewish students, it is garbage because half of the demonstrators, or maybe more, are Jewish students anyway. So they're not, they're not students from outer space. They're students that reflect the makeup of American society, including Christians, Muslims, and Jews.
All right, I'm. Thank you both. I'm going to go to a series of conversations with between Sam Husseini and the spokespersons at the State Department. Do you want to set this up for us, Sam? Hold on, let me. Yeah.
About the Geneva Conventions?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, I set out almost unintentionally to ask about the application of international law to Gaza, and it became evident by their evasions and deceits that they do not recognize the Geneva Conventions as applying to the Palestinians. They apply everywhere on the world except to the Palestinian people, who probably need it the most. So this shows to the extent to which the U.S. government is creating this political fiction that allows for Israel to make it a free fire zone, to basically kill people at will with legal impunity.
All right, let's take a listen.
Do you recognize the Geneva Conventions as applying?
I've answered your question.
No, you haven't. You've evaded it, and your colleague deceitfully responded to it. Do you recognize the Geneva Conventions? It's a simple question.
Go ahead.
Do you recognize the Geneva Conventions as applying to Gaza?
You interrupt me. It's not.
I'm not interrupting you. I'm asking for a simple question. A simple answer to a simple question.
Go ahead.
Do the Geneva Conventions apply to Gaza or not? They apply to everywhere on the planet except for the Palestinians. Isn't that right? Isn't that U.S. policy?
We continue to stress everywhere that
do the Geneva Conventions
law
apply?
Needs to be abided by and respected.
Do the Geneva Conventions apply? You're deceiving the American public.
Against Iran, I'd like to ask about the sanctions against Iran.
Yeah.
Just broadly speaking.
I sent our exchange from Monday around to a series of international lawyers. I don't know if you're familiar with Richard Falk. He's a very prominent international lawyer, taught at Princeton for years, was the UN rapporteur. He emailed back to me, Gaza remains, from the perspective of international law and the UN, an occupied Palestine territory subject to the Fourth Geneva Convention. I don't believe that Israel recognizes the Fourth Geneva Convention for all of these decades. I don't know what U.S. policy is on that question. So that's one question. Does the U.S. recognize the Geneva Conventions as applying to Palestinian territories?
Sam, what I'm just going to say is what you've heard us say before, is that we believe
in that. I'm asking this specific question.
That's the answer that I have for you, which is that we believe wholeheartedly that Israel has every right to defend itself and to defend its security, and what happened on October 7th would be unacceptable to any country, and steps must and should be taken. Steps must and should be taken to ensure that those events cannot be repeated. Now, I've taken three of your questions. I'm going to work the room.
Country attacking another. We're talking.
Thank you.
Thanks, I have two topics, but before we dive into them,
I'm going to pick up where I left off yesterday. Does the U.S. recognize the Fourth Geneva Convention as applying to Gaza and the West Bank?
Sam, I'm not going to get into the specifics of the legal aspects of this. I would have to double check for you.
It has been long-standing U.S. policy that the Fourth Geneva Convention does apply. Indeed, if the Fourth Geneva Convention doesn't apply, it's not clear to me what legal constraints there are on Israel. The Hansel memo was issued by Cyrus Vance when he was Secretary of State. That was U.S. policy. That's been U.S. policy. Pompeo seems to have said, we're not going to abide by this. Has this State Department, has the Biden-Blinken State Department effectively abrogated decades of U.S. policy and adopted the Pompeo policy on this question.
I'm not sure what you're referring to, but
okay, the Hansel memo is.
I understand what the Hansel memo is, but
you
I'm
do.
asking
Okay.
what your question.
Does it still apply? Does this State Department still abide by the Hansel memo?
We have had no change in policy as it relates to the Hansel memo, which is something that Matt has spoken to a number of months ago as well. But let me just reiterate, Sam, that this we have. From the forefront of this conflict, we have talked about very clearly the need for ensuring that this military operation is conducted in accordance with international law. That's something we continue to talk about.
You won't say that you abide
by that today.
But which law? Which law? The Fourth Geneva Convention or not?
Go ahead, Alex.
Which law? It's a free fire zone if you're not going to abide by the Fourth Geneva Convention. Which law? You're creating the legal construct.
Sam, we've taken two. If you're going to interrupt your colleagues, I'm going to ask you to leave.
No, I'm interrupting you.
The rest of the room has questions that they would like to get to.
I'm sure they do,
I've taken your question every day of this week.
Thank you.
Alex, please go ahead.
I just haven't gotten an answer.
Please go ahead, Alex.
Sure.
Can I get a yes or no as to whether or not the U.S. accepts the Geneva Conventions as applying to the occupied Palestinian territories?
We, of course, accept the Geneva Conventions. Go ahead.
Okay, I wasn't able to get that before. Thank you. So, Matt, just a follow-up on the, when you said yesterday that the Geneva Convention, you recognized the Geneva Conventions, you meant it with respect to the Israeli-occupied territory.
I meant exactly what I said.
But you didn't say the occupied territories.
Exactly what I said.
So you don't recognize it with respect to the occupied.
The briefing ended about 30 seconds.
But I didn't get called on again.
Yeah.
Euromed Monitor, Human Rights Monitor, reports that Israel is using drones to lure residents and then shoot them.
I've not seen that report, Sam, so I'm not going to comment on it. At every conversation that we have with our partners in Israel, we continue to stress the moral and strategic imperative that they have to work on deconfliction mechanisms and to ensure that civilian harm is minimized in every which way possible. And we'll continue to stress that every way we can.
Will you look at this report?
I am sure we'll look at this report, Sam. I don't have any comment on it right now.
Do you recognize the Geneva Conventions as applying?
I've answered your question, Sam.
No, you haven't. You've evaded it, and your colleague deceitfully responded to it. Do you recognize the Geneva Conventions? It's a simple question.
Go ahead.
Do you recognize the Geneva Conventions as applying to Gaza?
When you interrupt me, it's not.
I'm not interrupting you. I'm asking for a simple question. A simple answer to a simple question.
Go ahead. You got two questions.
It's totally No, I didn't get two questions.
You did. You asked a question about your report, and you asked to follow up.
Please go ahead. Another, and you're refusing to answer it.
Go ahead.
Do the Geneva Conventions apply to Gaza or not? They apply to everywhere on the planet except for the Palestinians. Isn't that right? Isn't that U.S. policy?
We continue to stress everywhere that
do the Geneva Conventions apply?
Needs to be abided by and respected.
Do the Geneva Conventions apply?
You are now interrupting your colleague.
Go ahead. I'm interrupting you. I'm not interrupting you. I'm insisting.
Wow. Okay. So there's a lot going on here.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, I raised it back in February. I don't know if people were paying attention to the dates. That's when I initially raised it. And then they put out signals at the beginning of 2024 that they were applying the Geneva Conventions in some of their favored outlets, Axios and so on. They gave out those signals. So when I asked Matt Miller, the senior spokesperson, and I think that's the only time he ever called on me since October 7th. He hasn't called on me since October 7th, except that one time. I asked, do the Geneva Conventions apply? And he said, of course we recognize the Geneva Conventions, but he didn't say with respect to Israel-Palestine. So I went there the next day to try to clarify that. And he didn't call on me. So I went up to him afterwards, as you can sometimes do. And I asked him that, and I had, my recorder going, and he basically refused to say that. So he's just saying, yes, we recognize the Geneva Conventions, not that they apply to Gaza. So there's this huge exception, and which is exactly what I asked about. And it really shows how duplicitous they are. It's this used to be called Clinton-esque, when you parse out words so that you don't know what the meaning of the word is. So he said, of course, we recognize the Geneva Conventions, to pretend that he answered my question affirmatively, when in fact he parsed it out in such a way so that they, in fact, are not recognizing the application of the Geneva Conventions to Gaza. There was one other exchange after this compilation was made, and they basically said, Matt Lee, who started asking tougher questions in recent months, the AP reporter followed up on it, and they said, we urge all parties to abide by the principles of the Geneva Conventions. Again, they're legalistically parsing it out. They are not saying we recognize the application of the Geneva Conventions to Gaza, and therefore that Israel has obligations as an occupying power. It's occurred to me in looking at this, people might have noted that legal scholars sometimes say that Israel as an occupying power actually doesn't have a right of self-defense vis-a-vis the Palestinians. Israel has a right to self-defense against Syria or Iran or whoever, but not against the Palestinians because it's an occupying power. So in a way, the State Department saying Israel has a right to defend itself, which has become something of a mantra, may be their backhanded way of saying we don't recognize the Geneva Conventions as applying to the Palestinians. It's very insidious because it sounds like a common sense thing. Of course, Israel has a right to defend itself. No, it doesn't have a right to defend itself when it's an occupying power. Just like the French didn't have a right to defend themselves against the Algerians. They had a right to restore order if there were attacks in occupied Algeria, but no legal right. An occupier does not have a legal right to defend itself. So them saying Israel has a right to defend itself, I think, is a backhanded way of saying we don't recognize the Geneva Conventions.
Said, would you like to address?
No, I mean, it's very clear what Sam said, and it is 100% true. I don't think that they will ever say that the Geneva Convention applies when it comes to the Palestinians or occupied territories. They're just not going to do it. And of course, they will always retort to Israel has a right to defend itself, because it's just an easy phrase. Everybody subscribes to it and so on. Because you need, a legal venue to talk about this issue, and you just don't have that. You don't have. This is not a courtroom. It's in a way maybe it is, because that's when you question the government. But it's not a courtroom in terms of the way you can introduce legal issues, legal evidence, and so on. But absolutely, Israel does not have the right to defend itself in the occupied territory or against Gaza, because it was a virtual occupier. It does not have the right to defend itself. Certainly not with 2,000 pound bombs and or the right, let's say, to kill 300 people as they did in Jabalia, to go after one person. So to assassinate one person. So there is you need a legal scholastic environment or venue so you can ask these issues. But as long as you can only address them ever so briefly, in venues like the State Department briefing, certainly they are going to hide behind the issue that they have a right to defend itself. That doesn't mean that we should not keep trying on these issues. It's a very important issue that should be pursued all the time.
Thanks, both of you. We're going to move to another conversation with everyone's favorite person, Matt Miller, because I think when Matt comes on the screen, everybody pays attention. not for the facts, but for the entertainment. Thanks, Saeed and Sam, for continuing to be in those spaces and being able to be patient and respectful despite what sometimes you are subjected to. We have shown in the past with Saeed some of the comments that are that would never be shared or said to anybody else, that were shared with some of the people asking questions about Palestine and Israel, including Saeed. So, do you want to set up this clip, Saeed? My exchange with the spokesman Miller.
I don't know how to do this. If you know, I mean, it's I don't know how to do it.
No,
Sorry.
I'm gonna play it, but do
Yeah.
you want to say something
Yeah.
about the your exchange with Matt on the Leahy law to Israel in light of
Yes, absolutely. The Leahy law, you know, Tim Reiser. Tim Reiser is the author of the Leahy law, and Tim Reiser, you know, was very specific, very detailed, and so on, quite scholastic when they, you know, back in, I think in 1999 or 1998, when they offered the Leahy law. So I asked him, and I said, you know, Tim Reiser says that Israel violates the Leahy law, and of course he refused to answer it. And then I went back and forth with him, and I said, but you know, he's the guy that wrote the book, you know, right? And he agreed. He's the guy that wrote the book. So on the one hand, he admits that the author of the Leahy Law says very clearly in a lengthy article, detailed. And by the way, I send it to them so they can see what I'm talking about when I raise it. And saying that very clearly that Israel violates humanitarian international law, violates U.S. law, you know, and therefore should not be given American weapons, and they just refuse to acknowledge it. Much like when the report on the National Security Memo 20, which, you know, Noura and Josh Paul, you know, as I'm sure you know, Bassam, you know, they issued their findings. I mean, this is the finding was very crystal clear that Israel violates the law. So that was basically the basic premise behind my exchange with them.
Actually, now that you mentioned it, we do have a clip on the report that was submitted regarding the illegal provision of arms to Israel by the United States. And then, of course, the administration here in the United States had its own version of it a couple of days ago. So I will actually be playing this on the exit, at the exit point today, because it addresses this point in about 10 minutes. And it was actually used in a new program that we have started last week titled Gaza on My Mind, which is basically a conversational program that addresses what is going on in Gaza at a time when we are seeing, at times, maybe not this moment, the drop in news and analysis and exposure of what is happening in Gaza as a result of the way the market works and the way politics work, especially in mainstream media. So we will show that clip in all cases. So I'll play this clip for now. This is the clip that you just introduced on the Leahy law. Yalla.
Issue. Tim Reiser, who basically wrote the Leahy statute way back, said that Israel has violated the Leahy law consistently, always. Now, you guys say here that Israel does not get preferential treatment and so on, but according to the author of this document, Israel has always done that. Do you have any comment on that?
There are all sorts of people outside of government who have drawn various conclusions one way or the other, and you see them offering those opinions in the press, as is their right to do all the time. I can tell you that is not a conclusion that we have reached.
Okay, but that's the guy that wrote the book, right?
He is.
Issue. Tim Reiser, who basically statute way back, said that Israel has violated the Leahy law consistently, always. Now, you guys say here that Israel does not get preferential treatment and so on, but according to the author of this document, Israel has always done that. Do you have any comment on that?
There are all sorts of people outside of government who have drawn various conclusions one way or the other, and you see them offering those opinions in the press, as is their right to do all the time. I can tell you that is not a conclusion that we have reached.
Okay, but that's the guy that wrote the book, right?
He is.
He is, he admits. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah.
Any comments on this, Sam?
You know, they really got a free ride for quite a while last year, but a lot of people were following up on Said's questioning on the Leahy law. I think I was in the room during this exchange, so I mean that has been something of a change. I think there's a hell of a lot more to do. But it was, good to see a decent amount of follow-up from other journalists on that.
All right. We're going to go to your second clip, Sam. It is, I'll read the title here, if it's okay, of the tweet. State Department claims they are not pressuring Abbas against invoking the Genocide Convention and the World Court to stop Israel's assault. I put them on notice regarding their own complicity under the convention. This is from November 2023. Do you want to set it up for us?
Sure. I had been talking to and looking at material from different legal experts who I cite here, advocating that the Genocide Convention be invoked. I'd actually started working on that issue during the 2014 attack. That's when I really started looking at this. And so I dusted off of that work in October and, put a lot of meat on it and put out a bunch of news releases on it and alerted a lot of activists about it, and eventually asked a question here at the press club that highlighted this. And I also cite work from the Center for Constitutional Rights about the culpability of U.S. government officials in terms of Israel's illegal action.
Let's go ahead and play those. Let me play it again. I think.
Sam, go ahead.
Thank you. President Lula of Brazil recently joined a growing list of world leaders condemning Israel, not just simply for war crimes, not just simply for crimes against humanity, but for genocide. The late president of the Center for Constitutional Rights, Michael Ratner, during Israel's 2014 assault on Gaza, which killed 2,000 Palestinians, advocated that the Genocide Convention be invoked in that case against Israel, saying that legally, for genocide, quote, "You don't need to kill all of them. You just need to have the mental intent to kill part of them." Craig Mokhiber, who just resigned as director of the New York office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, noted that intent, usually the hardest part of genocide to prove, isn't in this case. He wrote in his resignation letter, quote, "Explicit statements of intent by leaders in the Israeli government and military leave no room for doubt or debate." Finally, Francis Boyle, who successfully represented Bosnia and Herzegovina in their genocide case against Yugoslavia before the International Court of Justice, has similarly argued that the Palestinians or any other signer to the Genocide Convention should immediately initiate a emergency legal process invoking the convention at the International Court of Justice. Yet no government has done so. My question to you is, has the U.S. government pressured or bribed or threatened in any way, shape, or form Abbas, the people around him, institutions around him, from invoking this or any other legal mechanisms against Israel to stop its attack?
I don't even know where to start there, Sam. No, the U.S. has not been involved in pressuring or anything like that to any officials within the Palestinian Authority. What I will just say again in the context of this conflict, we have been incredibly clear that as Israel defends itself and defends its security, that it is imperative that it continues to make a distinction between Hamas terrorists and Palestinian civilians, and that's something we'll continue to raise directly with Israeli counterparts. I will also note that we, within the U.S. government, have a rigorous process for evaluating whether something constitutes genocide, and we have not made that assessment in this case. And it's really important to remember that Hamas bears responsibility for sparking this war, and they brought this tragic war to Gaza. They have compounded and perpetuated the suffering of the Palestinian people at every step of this crisis. And as I said, we continue to support Israel's right to defend itself against these terrorist attacks by Hamas.
You claim that you want Israel to make the distinction, but you don't seem to be making the distinction.
Absolutely
if I might, I didn't interrupt. Liabilities for aiding and abetting genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity under international law, and may face investigation and prosecution. Do members of the State Department face similar possibilities?
Again, Sam, as I said, we have the U.S. government has a rigorous process in place for evaluating whether something constitutes genocide, and we have not made that assessment in this case.
But you continue to pretend that the bombing of hospital after hospital, bakery after bakery, university after university, and somehow you keep pretending that, they're just after military people.
I appreciate your question, Sam. I've taken two of them. Now I'm going to work the room a little bit. Go ahead.
Any feedback?
Yeah, well, I mean, I cut away for a second there. I told him not to interrupt me, and then the last part I was quoting the Center for Constitutional Rights, which put out a letter warning members of Congress about their culpability, potential culpability.
Let me. Will you allow me to?
Sure.
Might have to do it indirectly here.
It was a very short
cut. The Center for Constitutional Rights just put out a statement. Legal organizations put members of Congress on notice for complicity on genocide. Quote, please take note, this is a letter that they sent to members of Congress, Center for Constitutional Rights. Please take notice that should you vote in favor of that package, the Biden package for Israel, you risk facing criminal and civil liabilities for aiding and abetting genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity under international law, and may face investigation and prosecution.
Yeah, sorry, that was the point that was missed. So go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously we're at an impasse now with the Genocide Convention having been invoked and orders being given by the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court doing absolutely nothing, even though it kind of keeps pretending, or they're getting reports that they're going to do something. They've been a totally corrupted institution. And I don't quite understand why they haven't gotten, more scrutiny from people in Europe as a subject of activism. And I don't know if there's a forum to question Khan, or if he's hiding underneath a bed this entire time, or perhaps on a tropical island. I have no idea. So the whole legal structure has been a flux. The Genocide Convention, I should add, the way that people who advocated for it, like Francis Boyle, who's the main advocate for it, and Craig Mokhiber has made this point as well in recent months, is that it needs to not just be there, but also at the UN. Now, we recently saw a vote at the UN involving Palestine as a non-voting member of the UN. The legal experts I'm talking to have said that a lot more can be done at the Security Council, at the General Assembly, to get around the US's veto at the Security Council. So that I think that needs to be the subject of far more scrutiny. For example, you could have the General Assembly suspend Israel from partaking. They can't boot it out of the UN, but they can suspend it from partaking in General Assembly deliberations. Some have argued that they could actually admit Palestine as a full voting member, in spite of a lot of the reporting that I'm seeing on that these days.
Sorry, Sam, but that's exactly what happened last week. I mean, they voted for Palestine to be a full member.
But it's not voting member.
Not voting member. That's what. Yeah, that's. I mean, that's. Well, that needs to be done by the Security Council.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
like
right. Yeah,
if you talk to John Quigley, who's a leading legal expert on this, he says that the idea that you have to go to the Security Council to get that isn't true. It's not his reading of the UN Charter. Right. He thinks that the General Assembly has more power than people think it does, in terms of membership and in terms of potentially other things. I mean, you have Craig Mokhiber out there saying the General Assembly could put together a legal justification for an interventionist force. These legal experts are saying that there's a lot more that the General Assembly can do than what it's done so far. So, in a way, the South Africa invoking the Genocide Convention at the International Court of Justice was sort of step one of a two-step process, and step two hasn't happened yet.
All right.
But I mean, that's not something I can really get into at the State Department.
No, I understand. Yeah, no, that's for our benefit and
material. I'll send you that material, though. You might be interested.
Right.
Thanks to both. I know that Saeed, you have to drop off at some point. Do you have any last words for us on what this is not just about your conversations at the State Department briefings, because of your extensive knowledge, both of you, and I've had conversations with you both, or have read you for more than 20 years. Can you share with us what your prognosis, or what is your outlook regarding what is actually what you think is actually happening right now in Rafah, and what might the future portend, especially that there is a discussion whether Israel is going to go all out in Rafah even more than it is right now in terms of flattening Rafah altogether, or is there a maneuver going on? This is something that is extremely sensitive, and we saw it when there was a Hamas agreement on the terms of the deal to end the hostilities last week, and then Palestinians sprung up in Rafah with all sorts of celebrations, and of course many of them who did actually the next day or two were actually killed. So can you just give us your opinion on what?
Yes, absolutely. Well, what we're looking at is the attack on Rafah is really underway. It has, we have seen that last week, we know exactly which areas that were struck. Israel is striking in the east. It is, of course, struck in the south and actually occupied the entry point, Rafah, the Rafah crossing, under the full eye of the Egyptians, for instance. They have an agreement with Egypt not to do that. That was part of Camp David agreement. And then they are also attacking the west. So they are attacking Rafah from all areas. I believe that the attack on Rafah is underway. I mean, it's not in a mass, they're not sending all their tanks and so on, because they learned, they don't want to be caught, so densely or so thickly as they go in by Hamas fighters. So they are doing it. I mean, when you talk about the movement, of 350,000 people today, the UN said 350,000 people already left, and they went to an area called Al-Mawasi, which is tents and so on. They don't really have the kind of accommodation to take care of 1.4 million people. I mean, keep in mind this: they were driven there by the Israelis. They told them to go there because they're safe. So Israel is doing what it's doing. I mean, it is very clear that the strategy that Netanyahu has, and he has nothing else, by the way. They don't have a strategy for Gaza. They don't have a strategy beyond what happens and so on. But he has a strategy to continue kicking the can down the road and keep the war going for as long as he can, till after the election, or during maybe the month after the convention for the election, the Democratic and Republican convention. So we see the attack that the United States has warned so much about, and actually said that it drew a red line, that it became quite pinkish. Then there's no red line. Then the president says, "I'm not going to send in the 2,000-pound bombs and the 500-pound bombs, but we can send them the 250-pound bombs," and so on. So, in short, yes, the attack is undergoing. It is going on now, according to Israeli intelligence and U.S. intelligence, per a very lengthy article in today's New York Times. Sinwar is not there. The leadership of Hamas is not in Rafah. So they're telling them what you're doing is wrong. It's not going to net you whatever results that you wanted. So, but as far as the attack, it is underway. And remember, in the last 48 hours, we've seen Israel go back and attack in the north, and attack Jabalia, and attack many other places, Hayy Zaytun, all these areas. So anyone that tells you that the attack of Rafah is in the offing is wrong. The attack of Rafah is underway as we speak.
Sam, any word on whether this is going to continue to the level of flattening Rafah like the Israelis did in other cities?
Yeah, I don't have a great deal to add from what Saeed said, because I think that that's their consistent pattern. I would add that, Israel's stated goals, like the U.S. government, stated goals are not actual goals. So, the U.S. saying, "Oh, Sinwar isn't there; he's in Khan Yunis or wherever." I don't think that really matters to the Israelis, because their goal isn't actually the decapitation of Hamas, as they claim. Their goal is to upend Palestinian society as much as possible, because that's ultimately the ultimate goal. Whether they can achieve it now or later is the crippling of Palestinian society and the ultimate ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, as we've seen for 75 years. So that would be completely consistent with them flattening Rafah, or doing as much damage as they can possibly get away with until there's sufficient pushback to Biden, through protests, through other mechanisms, through electoral threats and whatever else, in order to compel the U.S. government potentially, and other governments, to do what's necessary in order to stop it.
Thanks to you both. Do you have any last words before you leave, Saeed or Sam? We will end, as I shared, with a clip about the report on arms provision, or the legal arms provision, that was led by Noor Arikat and Josh, from the retired, or the resigned official from the State Department.
Josh There's Paul. No better ending to what we have been saying than what you just said.
Sam?
All right.
Yeah. I mean, the people resigning, to the extent that they have, I think helped change the dynamics at the State Department briefings. That fed a good number of questions. So that certainly had an influence in terms of my day-to-day work and the whole dynamic there. So that's great.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not hearing you.
Sorry. So thanks to both of you and to everyone who has joined us. And thanks to those who have worked in the back end, so to speak, to make all of this happen. We will be back with you shortly. I hope you can both join us again. Sam, thank you for joining us for the first time. But I will, from the comments and from what I've been hearing, people would love to have you back. There's a lot of interest in what you and Saeed and others like Matt do at these briefings. Let's go to the clip from Noor Arikat about the report that her and Josh Paul, the individual who resigned from the State Department, produced a report on the illegal arms provision to Israel by the United States. Shukran, Sam.
Shukran. Salam.
Salam. You can feel free to listen on and offline. Here we go.
Okay.
So I'm gonna give you a chance to breathe, Sam. So we'll put you off the air, at least the image, but you can continue watching as we move forward. Here we go. Something to you. أول شيء, how are you? كيفك? معصبة. Okay, so that's putting it lightly, knowing that I know exactly how you feel and how I feel, but we are going to keep moving. My question for you is, we know that you produced and worked on, with a group of people, but you led the charge, a report on the legality of U.S. provided weapons to Israel. Can you tell us about it and maybe share what it might mean for the current moment?
Sure, absolutely. So to be clear, I co-chaired an independent task force with Josh Paul, who resigned in October from the Political Military Bureau in the State Department in opposition and protest of the U.S. providing weapons to Israel in what was already apparently a genocidal attack with the intent to destroy the Palestinian people in Gaza in whole or in part. In early February, a group of 19 senators moved on the Senate floor to create legislation that would basically lift up existing U.S. legislation that oversees the transfer of U.S. weapons to conflict zones and the compliance by those belligerent states with international and U.S. law. What the White House did in that moment was to take those senators off the floor. They were trying to amend a supplemental budget resolution, and they took them off the floor and created a White House memorandum known as National Security Memorandum Number 20, which stipulates that all states that receive arms from the United States have to provide assurances that they're using them in compliance with U.S. and international law. And in addition, within 90 days, the administration, executive branch within the Departments of Defense or state are obligated to then submit a report to Congress to report on whether or not that recipient state is using U.S. provided weapons in compliance with international and U.S. law. Josh Paul and I combined forces, cynical as we should be, that the Biden administration would actually produce this report as diligently as they should, not least because they have not ever triggered any U.S. law in the oversight of Israel's use of military support or of weapons in the human rights violations that they've committed against Palestinians, not least because there was mounting evidence that indicated already that Israel was in violation, and that within the State Department, we understood that Secretary Blinken was actually not listening to experts within the State Department, specifically 4 out of 7 State Department bureaus had put into questions the assurances that Israel has submitted, which means that the Biden administration is already in breach, not least because the administration thought to sanction the Netzach Yehuda battalion, which is responsible for the killing of Omar Assad, the 78-year-old Palestinian American man, at the hands of the Netzach Yehuda battalion, who were supposed to be sanctioned and then not sanctioned. We were very wary that the administration would actually comply with the terms of NSM 20. And so on our own initiative, we created a task force comprised of munitions experts, former State Department officials, as well as legal experts, in order to both document the provision of U.S. weapons to Israel and its use and violation under international law. We do so under 3 laws in particular. One is international humanitarian law, and here we look specifically at customary international humanitarian law, because as any lawyer understands, law is not a guarantee for an outcome, but only a battleground for one. To avoid the interpretive battles that would take place, we chose to go for customary international humanitarian law because the U.S. and Israel are outstanding objectors to the additional protocols to the Geneva Conventions. And so here we would find less resistance and controversy, especially because Israel in this moment, as indicated by their Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2023, has moved to change the laws of war altogether. I'll talk about that a little later. The other bodies of law that we looked at were the U.S. military's best practices in civilian harm mitigation, and then also U.S. Section 620I of the Foreign Assistance Act, which stipulates that the U.S. will not provide military means to a belligerent state, which is also impeding access to humanitarian aid that the U.S. is trying to deliver. So using those legal frameworks, we also had a team of some 7 legal researchers from U.S. law schools across the United States. And then as a matter of methodology, we collected data from 40 organizations and media organizations. Only 2 of our sources are not open source. Everything else is available, but we went through that data, created some 8,000 lines of Israeli strikes that we looked at, distilled that by limiting what were the attacks that were specifically where U.S. weapons were used. And then after we distilled that, looked specifically what were the cases that were unequivocal violations according to the 3 bodies of law that we highlighted. The result of that labor and research is this report that we submitted, a 76-page report. We submitted this to the White House on April 18th, 2024. We then released it publicly the following week on April 24th, 2024, in a public in a press briefing at the National Press Club. And then the following week, we provided a briefing to representatives on the House and the Senate side, the Senate briefing that was organized by Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. The Senate briefing that was organized by Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland included 13 senators who attended in person, as well as nearly a dozen other offices where staffers were represented, but not the senators themselves. Our objective is basically to demonstrate the U.S. One must report to Congress how U.S. weapons are used in how Israel is using U.S. weapons in violation of U.S. and international law. That should, at the very least, trigger the suspension of arms transfers to Israel. And so this is the overall objective. But the idea here, and the way that Josh Paul has put it, is that we did the administration's homework for it in doing this amount of research to make it undeniable that the administration cannot say that it doesn't have enough evidence to submit. Our report compounds reports that were also submitted by Human Rights Watch, Oxfam, as well as Amnesty International, amongst others. As of now, the Biden administration has already missed its own deadline to submit the report to Congress, which was May 8th. But we also know that on May 8th, Biden said publicly that that Israel was targeting civilians and civilian population centers with U.S. weapons, and that they would cease transfer of those weapons should Israel invade Rafah. Obviously, that's too little and not enough. Because what that means is that right now the U.S. is pursuing the question of arms transfers as a matter of policy rather than as a matter of law. And we can be as cynical as we should be about the law, but we are using that as leverage in this moment in order to both highlight the contradictions and to add pressure on the administration from within, especially and to provide a tool for those for staffers, for public officials, for elected officials who agree with us. We are providing them a tool in order to agitate further.
Thank you, Nora. This is actually quite comprehensive. Although we would love to learn more, I have a couple of questions, but I promised you not to go over a few minutes. This is your first appearance as a guest on Gaza on My Mind. We'd love to have you again. Very quickly, if you can just take a minute and tell me what might be the consequences of the U.S. ignoring this report and, of course, all of the illegal procedures or actions that it is carrying out. Is it something that will one day be addressed, and in retrospect, just like with the Iraq War, we'll find out all of these things, including your report, are actually on point and when it's too late? Or is there something that might actually happen now or in the coming weeks that would even further caution the administration?
As you know, and as you indicate, there's been a lot of attempts in order to use legal mechanisms to stem the Biden administration's participation in the ongoing genocide of Palestinians in Gaza, and yet so many of those legal mechanisms are stymied by a political situation. And what's most apparent in this moment is that the Biden administration has turned this into a policy question that is outside of the law. So there is nothing here that we can actually use as a mechanism legally that will stem what the Biden administration is doing. I think that the closest attempt to doing that is what Center for Constitutional Rights has done by suing Blinken, Biden, and Austin for violating the Genocide Convention and specifically the provision to prevent genocide. But even there, we saw that the Ninth Circuit, despite agreeing that it was genocide, dismissed the case for a lack of justiciability, not having the authority in order, to actually tell the administration what to do because it was better suited for another branch of government, also known as the political question doctrine. They are going up on appeal on June 10th. And so we should all watch that closely. How we use this is basically another tool to agitate. We are, providing empirical evidence, data, marshaling the law. And in this case, 2/3 of our report focuses on U.S. law in order to also marshal the argument that this isn't just about international law, which the U.S. oftentimes dismisses, in the words of former Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, as foreign law, but this is also a violation of U.S. law. So we're using these internal contradictions in order to heighten pressure, and we think that the greatest form of pressure is the public protest, as leveraged by the student activists in this particular moment, but that has been leveraged by activists across the globe for the past almost 8 months now, incessantly, in order to stop what should have never been possible to happen.
Thank you. We are being asked to repeat the video for those who joined late. Apparently, we have a big rush that just joined. So we will actually do that in just a moment. We're going to repeat the summary by Noor Arikat on the report that was submitted to the administration on the illegal provision of arms to Israel. Here we go. Okay, there we go. Good afternoon, Noura. We are very delighted that you are able to join us. I know you won't be able to join the actual live feed, but here we are. Our question to you. أول شيء, how are you? كيفك?
معصبة.
Masbe. Okay. So that's putting it lightly, knowing that I know exactly how you feel and how I feel, but we are going to keep moving. My question for you is, we know that you produced and worked on with a group of people, but you led the charge, a report on the legality of U.S. provided weapons to Israel. Can you tell us about it and maybe share what it might mean for the current moment?
Sure, absolutely. So to be clear, I co-chaired an independent task force with Josh Paul, who resigned in October from the Political Military Bureau in the State Department in opposition and protest of the U.S. providing weapons to Israel in what was already apparently a genocidal attack with the intent to destroy the Palestinian people in Gaza in whole or in part. In early February, a group of 19 senators moved on the Senate floor to create legislation that would basically lift up existing U.S. legislation that oversees the transfer of U.S. weapons to conflict zones and the compliance by those belligerent states with international and U.S. law. What the White House did in that moment was to take those senators off the floor. They were trying to amend a supplemental budget resolution, and they took them off the floor and created a White House memorandum known as National Security Memorandum number 20, which stipulates that all states that receive arms from the United States have to provide assurances that they're using them in compliance with U.S. and international law. And in addition, within 90 days, the administration, executive branch within the Departments of Defense or state are obligated to then submit a report to Congress to report on whether or not that recipient state is using U.S. provided weapons in compliance with international and U.S. law. Josh Paul and I combined forces, cynical as we should be, that the Biden administration would actually produce this report as diligently as they should, not least because they have not ever triggered any U.S. law in the oversight of Israel's use of military support or of weapons in the human rights violations that they've committed against Palestinians, not least because there was mounting evidence that indicated already that Israel was in violation, and that within the State Department, we understood that Secretary Blinken was actually not listening to experts within the State Department. Specifically, 4 out of 7 State Department bureaus had put into questions the assurances that Israel has submitted, which means that the Biden administration is already in breach, not least because the administration thought to sanction the Netzach Yehuda battalion, which is responsible for the killing of Omar Assad, the 78-year-old Palestinian American man, at the hands of the Netzach Yehuda battalion, who were supposed to be sanctioned and then not sanctioned. We were very wary that the administration would actually comply with the terms of NSM 20. And so on our own initiative, we created a task force comprised of munitions experts, former State Department officials, as well as legal experts, in order to both document the provision of U.S. weapons to Israel and its use and violation under international law. We do so under 3 laws in particular. One is international humanitarian law, and here we look specifically at customary international humanitarian law, because as any lawyer understands, law is not a guarantee for an outcome, but only a battleground for one. To avoid the interpretive battles that would take place, we chose to go for customary international humanitarian law because the U.S. and Israel are outstanding objectors to the additional protocols to the Geneva Conventions. And so here we would find less resistance and controversy, especially because Israel in this moment, as indicated by their Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2023, has moved to change the laws of war altogether. I'll talk about that a little later. The other bodies of law that we looked at were the U.S. military's best practices in civilian harm mitigation, and then also U.S. Section 620I of the Foreign Assistance Act, which stipulates that the U.S. will not provide military means to a belligerent state, which is also impeding access to humanitarian aid that the U.S. is trying to deliver. So using those legal frameworks, we also had a team of some 7 legal researchers from U.S. law schools across the United States. And then as a matter of methodology, we collected data from 40 organizations and media organizations. Only 2 of our sources are not open source. Everything else is available, but we went through that data, created some 8,000 lines of Israeli strikes that we looked at, distilled that by limiting what were the attacks that were specifically where US weapons were used. And then after we distilled that, looked specifically what were the cases that were unequivocal violations according to the 3 bodies of law that we highlighted. The result of that labor and research is this report that we submitted, a 76-page report. We submitted this to the White House on April 18th, 2024. We then released it publicly the following week on April 24th, 2024, in a public in a press briefing at the National Press Club. And then the following week, we provided a briefing to representatives on the House and the Senate side. The Senate briefing that was organized by Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. The Senate briefing that was organized by Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland included 13 senators who attended in person, as well as nearly a dozen other offices where staffers were represented, but not the senators themselves. Our objective is basically to demonstrate the U.S. One, must report to Congress how U.S. weapons are used in how Israel is using U.S. weapons in violation of U.S. and international law. That should, at the very least, trigger the suspension of arms transfers to Israel. And so this is the overall objective. But the idea here, and the way that Josh Paul has put it, is that we did the administration's homework for it in doing this amount of research to make it undeniable that the administration cannot say that it doesn't have enough evidence to submit. Our report compounds reports that were also submitted by Human Rights Watch, Oxfam, as well as Amnesty International, amongst others. As of now, the Biden administration has already missed its own deadline to submit the report to Congress, which was May 8th. But we also know that on May 8th, Biden said publicly that that Israel was targeting civilians and civilian population centers with U.S. weapons, and that they would cease transfer of those weapons should Israel invade Rafah. Obviously, that's too little and not enough, because what that means is that right now the U.S. is pursuing the question of arms transfers as a matter of policy rather than as a matter of law. And we can be as cynical as we should be about the law, but we are using that as leverage in this moment in order to both highlight the contradictions and to add pressure on the administration from within, especially and to provide a tool for those for staffers, for public officials, for elected officials who agree with us. We are providing them a tool in order to agitate further.
Thank you, Noura. This is actually quite comprehensive, although we would love to learn more. I have a couple of questions, but I promised you not to go over a few minutes. This is your first appearance as a guest on Gaza on My Mind. We'd love to have you again. Very quickly, if you can just take a minute and tell me what might be the consequences of the U.S. ignoring this report and, of course, all of the illegal procedures or actions that it is carrying out. Is it something that will one day be addressed, and in retrospect, Just like with the Iraq war, we'll find out all of these things, including your report, are actually on point and when it's too late? Or is there something that might actually happen now or in the coming weeks that would even further caution the administration?
And as you indicate, there's been a lot of attempts in order to use legal mechanisms to stem the Biden administration's participation in the ongoing genocide of Palestinians in Gaza, and yet so many of those legal mechanisms are stymied by a political situation. And what's most apparent in this moment is that the Biden administration has turned this into a policy question that is outside of the law. So there is nothing here that we can actually use as a mechanism legally that will stem what the Biden administration is doing. I think that the closest attempt to doing that is what Center for Constitutional Rights has done by suing Blinken, Biden, and Austin for violating the Genocide Convention and specifically the provision to prevent genocide. But even there, we saw that the Ninth Circuit, despite agreeing that it was genocide, dismissed the case for a lack of justiciability, not having the authority in order, to actually tell the administration what to do because it was better suited for another branch of government, also known as the political question doctrine. They are going up on appeal on June 10th. And so we should all watch that closely. How we use this is basically another tool to agitate. We are, providing empirical evidence, data, marshaling the law. And in this case, 2/3 of our report focuses on U.S. law in order to also marshal the argument that this isn't just about international law, which the U.S. oftentimes dismisses, in the words of Antonin Scalia, former Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, as foreign law, but this is also a violation of U.S. law. So we're using these internal contradictions in order to heighten pressure. And we think that, the greatest form of pressure is the public protest as leveraged by the student activists in this particular moment, but that has been leveraged by activists across the globe for the past almost 8 months now, incessantly, in order to stop what should have never been possible to happen.
Thank you, Nora. ما تعصب كتير. We believe that we believe that we can win, and I appreciate you taking the time. I hope you can join us live next time, and best of luck in all your endeavors.
Thank you, Bassam.
أهلا وسهلا. سلام.
Salam.